parts absolutely welding to build plates, a Bambu P1P that's a little bit upset, Facebook is never a good place to be, and some weebly wobbly, but not timey-wimey, Prusa fails. All this and more, PrintFix Friday, episode 92. Let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're dealing with some print issues, we're here to help. In fact, you can reach out to us on all the social media platforms, as well as you can email us directly, youtube@3dmusketeers.com. Links are in that description down below, of course. If you're having issues, reach out to us. We'd love to help you out. We don't charge for it. It's just part of what I love to do to help you guys get better at 3D printing and keep those skills honed when and where possible. And of course, we are accepting fan submissions, so if you do want to get your failures featured on this channel and have me take a look at them and see how we can keep them from happening in the future, hit me up. Always happy to help. Just like I'm happy to tell you to leave a like and get subscribed if you haven't. Got some awesome fails for you. Some Prusa, some Bambu, and some from printers I'm not exactly certain of. Let's get into it. First up, we have a fail from Patreon member DK Shadow, who has been riding the struggle bus on a heavily modified Prusa MK2. As we talked about in the past, modifying printers is like modifying cars. You're kind of on your own if you don't know what you're doing when it comes to fixing it. And boy, is he having a bit of a challenge. This is a Voron test cube. Yes, on a Prusa. I know, just we're gonna let it go. By the way, we're looking to produce our own test model. Let me know what you guys would like to see in it in those comments below. But we've got some pretty bad x-axis shift here on this MK2. When you deal with printers that have been around a while, especially ones that you've been working on, it's good to check those grub screws. He was looking at doing things like replacing the belts, as it's been the same since he bought it as an original Mark II, which shouldn't be a problem unless the belt is starting to snap. He was wondering about belt tension and what feels right. We talked previously about tensioning and tightening your belts. We'll card to that video so you guys can take a look. It is very much a feel thing, right? You don't want it to twang like a banjo. That's a little too much. But you also don't want it to just sit there and be all saggy. You want to get a little bit of tension on it. And at least on Prusas, they can tell you. Now, I don't know if the Mark II has the ability to tell you that. And I don't believe it does because they still use physical end stop switches. This one has been through quite a few iterations of, we're going to put quotes around upgrades, because honestly, if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. I saw this and instantly said, it's a grub screw issue. And the reason I know it's a grub screw issue is because it's not a crazy amount of movement. If you had a loose belt and for some reason it was just skipping teeth on the motor itself, you would see way more issues than just this. And you would hear it. You would audibly hear the belt skipping across the teeth on the motor. And so that's not normally the issue. What does and can happen is that the grub screws come loose and the actual pulley that is attached to the motor itself starts to wiggle back and forth, and you end up with backlash. So when you're going left and then you want to come back right, the machine doesn't want to do that because, you know, it takes a little bit for that tension to be taken up, and vice versa. This can absolutely be something that is dependent on speed, print direction, and a few other factors. But if you've had your printer for a while, part of basic maintenance is check those grub screws. It is a really easy low-hanging fruit. If this was something to do with belts, you would see the machine starting to crash hard, where it's adding error rather than it being back and forth kind of oddly. It's not a common thing that we see where belts will get that loose over time, especially nowadays with better belts from companies like Gates, and even the cheaper manufacturers are using Gates belts. So I don't know. I haven't tensioned belts in a while. It doesn't really seem like it's much of an issue. I'd love to know what you guys think about tensioning belts and if it's really as big of a deal as it used to be. I know back in the day when we used steel reinforced belts rather than fiberglass, it was a huge issue. And prior to that, not using reinforced belts at all, heck, even sometimes using smooth belts, it got jank back then. And I think that's part of a thing that has moved forward, even though the tech has gotten much better. Love to know what you think. Help prints getting stuck to bed. Before, I had an issue where prints were not sticking to my bed. Now I have compiled new firmware and started using Prusa Slicer preset settings, and my prints are getting stuck so bad I can hardly get them off. I had to use a very thin piece of aluminum and just keep wedging under them until they pop off. I'm very new to 3D printing, but I'm learning. As far as slicer settings, and setting my printer to the right calibration is where I need the most knowledge. Hey, PrintFix Friday is where you can get a lot of that. You found the right video. I found that Prusa Slicer was beginner friendly rather than using Cura. I did solve my issue of prints not sticking to the bed. Does anyone have any clue what I should adjust so that they are not completely glued to the bed? I'm assuming. I'm using an all metal hot end temp 215 extrusion set 2mm using a Bowden. I'm assuming that's retraction. I have a glass heat bed set at 70C, so most likely PLA. I've also set my layer height to 0.2 if that makes a difference. Honestly, I'm not sure if layer height would affect this or not, so don't make fun. I can't find anything on prints getting glued to the bed, but it's very, very difficult to pop these guys off, and I feel it shouldn't be that hard. Oh, one more thing. I've tried with the bed hot and cooled off. I've also got a cleaner I use to clean up the bed every time I got to print, so those issues aren't a problem. Thanks in advance. Okay, we got a lot to unpack here. First off, newbie. I get it. But you've given me a lot of information, but there's one thing I'm missing. What freaking printer are you using? I'm gonna go ahead and assume it's an Ender. Let's see if we can pull anything from their user profile here. Okay, so apparently this is an Anycubic Mega Zero with a mini SKR MZ board. Or, I mean, based on some knowledge here, I'm thinking that's what we're looking at. So that's a good thing to mention because I have no idea, and if you didn't have a post history for me to go through and look, we'd be out of luck. So you're using an Anycubic Bowden-based printer, that's fine. Stock settings and Prusa Slicer should be okay, but what you are looking for is your first layer calibration. You're gonna want to make sure that your bed is properly level. And tram, although technically those are somewhat of the same thing, just tramming is leveling in more than one axis. It's technically what you need to do for a bed. We'll card to that video so you guys can take a look. But you also want to look at the Z offset. If your prints are getting welded to that build plate, chances are probably a little bit too close. If you're using a glass build plate, personally, I don't like using glass build plates. I've never liked the carborundum glass plates that come on printers. I prefer a flex bed, whether it is one from Wham Bam. Of course, you can use code Musketeers 2022. Yes, it's still Musketeers 2022. For 10% off of your order over at Wham Bam, but there are other options for you out there as well. You can stick with glass if you want, but personally, I would flip it over and use the smooth side of the glass rather than the carborundum. Carborundum is silicon carbide, so if your nozzle happens to scrape across that bed, you're gonna have a bad time. And considering you're telling me that your prints are getting welded to the bed itself, I'm guessing you're gonna be a little bit close. We're also missing photos, and the photos would help us heavily here to get a better understanding of what we're missing, what we have, and what we really need to get the right answers. But don't be afraid, everybody is a newbie at some point. But I am worried that a newbie is upgrading printers with new motherboards. We've talked about this before. I really don't think people should be upgrading their printers unless it is immediately necessary. If you want to put a different fan duct on it, fine. But when you start doing things like messing with motherboards, you start introducing ridiculous amounts of variability that I and others that would try to help you cannot predict at all. We don't know how good you are at the wiring, if something was screwed up there, are your PID settings appropriate, have you done a new PID calibration, are you running auto bed leveling? There are so many things that will change when you go to a new board, and these SKR MZ boards are pretty decent boards, and they're capable of a lot of awesomeness. But if you're not comfortable running the machine and knowing some of the lingo, I think doing things like replacing a motherboard is getting way ahead of yourself. That's more of a personal thing. I don't like seeing newbies struggle because this is what ends up with a printer getting stuck in a corner to collect dust. Because someone gets so frustrated with it, they say, F this, F that, F you, and F this printer, I'm done. It's like me and the Bambu. But instead, if we just kept it stock, worked with it the way that it was, and dealt with some of the quirks that it came with, we might get a better solution, and then we can start adding some variability where it matters. Threads on the underside. We have a Prusa MK3S here with a smooth double-sided PEI spring steel sheet, and they're using North E PLA. I have no idea what that is, but cool. PLA. 215 on the extruder, 1.9. Oh, negative 1.9 on the nozzle. Okay, well, that's going to be our first thing. Does anyone know why I sometimes get these thread sores on the underside of print? We definitely have an issue with our Z offset. We can see that it's definitely not right. What you will want to do is, one, go ahead and loosen up the holder on your Pinda Pro. If you are running negative 1.9, to get your printer to get that first layer looking good, then you're likely not doing a good first layer to begin with, and your pin to probe is not set correctly. To do this, loosen it up, put a zip tie under it, and then push the probe down onto the zip tie. To verify, you'll want to make sure that your nozzle is basically touching the build plate when you do this so that you have the right offset. For me, that seems to work really well. It ends up with my Z offset being somewhere between the -0.7 and -1 millimeter. Now, of course, your mileage may vary, but when you're running near that upper tier, it's not good. We do definitely have some issues with our build plate here where it's not clean. We definitely got to look at getting that build plate clean because impurities are absolutely going to be an issue. If you haven't done it in a while, the best thing that you can do is go ahead, take the smooth sheet off your Prusa, bring it over to your sink, and wash it with hot water and dish soap. Do not touch it with your greasy hands because your hands are greasy and they're going to leave impurities on that build plate. In between builds, you can wipe it down with IPA if you would like. Just be careful that you don't use acetone. We use Windex here. It seems to work fine for us, but hey, your mileage may vary. The hot water and dish soap is a great way to do it. It just takes a little bit to dry and is a bit of a pain in the butt as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, this one is all about that first layer. You want to make sure you get that probe height set appropriately, and I'm guessing that it's not. And when you're right at the edge of what that probe can sense to get a good first layer, it's not going to read as well as you would want. When you start getting past negative or positive 1.5, to me, it's time to go ahead and adjust that probe manually before you try to compensate with some sort of firmware. We got a P1P issue here. Hello, I'm hoping someone could chime in on the slight issue that I've just cropped up on my P1P. I was printing a toolbox from printables and noticed certain layer heights, the inner wall of the box started to degrade. What alerted me was the nozzle hitting the model. It completed the print, but 3/4 of an inch of the top of the inner wall has an irregular surface and blobs. However, this doesn't affect the outer wall of the box. Even the cat knows I get stressed out for Bambu fails, so she's here to help. Are you here to help? Are you here to help with this Bambu issue? I've only had this printer a few days and it's been printing without issues up to this point. Out of curiosity, I started a Benchy with the same settings but that printed without any issues. After the Benchy, I started printing the lid, but the same problem reoccurred. I've started searching, but haven't found much information about this type of situation. Unfortunately, can't make any sense of it, so help would be appreciated. So we've got a Bambu Lab P1P, and I looked at this and knew exactly what the problem was from the beginning. The volumetric flow rate is way too high. We have a part that is getting chewy, it's probably the right term. They're using a Duramic PLA Plus, but the setting is for Polyterra. Polyterra is a high flow filament. That's what it's kind of designed for. You are not using Polyterra. Stop using the Polyterra settings. You need to go down to a generic PLA setting. We can see that they've adjusted acceleration, and that is partly why the Benchy worked. The Benchy is much smaller than what you're doing, so the printer is not able to get up to full speed. But with some basic math, we can see that 300 millimeters a second for the inner wall is actually closer to 30 cubic millimeters a second. I think it's like 27 or so than it is 22. Now, the machine will limit its speed, or should limit its speed to that 22 cubic millimeters per second, but that is still way too fast for generic PLA. You should be looking at the generic PLA profiles, which in Bambu Studio actually show 12 cubic millimeters a second, about the same speed as an E3D Revo. Take that with whatever grain of salt that you guys want. So if you aren't running material that is designed to run that fast, you shouldn't run material that's that fast. It's just basic, decent math at that point. You're not running Polyterra, don't run the Polyterra profile. Now, you might not know any better, and that happens, but this is absolutely a heating issue. Now, you could technically turn the heat way up on your part and basically force it to extrude at these higher speeds, but it would be better just to turn it on to the slower settings and see how that goes for you. The reason that you're only seeing it on the top bit is because you're no longer stopping and starting to do these smaller individual pieces. You're doing the entire perimeter all at once, which allows the machine to maintain its speed. Whereas here, short little bursts of really, really high flow rate are generally not too much of an issue for printers. But extended long bursts of heavy extrusion can overwhelm a heater cartridge pretty quickly, and the machine is simply not going to be able to extrude fast enough because it can't get the heat into the inside of the filament where it is needed to get fully liquefied. So in a case like this, what do? You run the generic settings and you should be okay. With that being said, Bambu has told me, and I'm going to tell you guys, that the generic settings should not be trusted and will likely need some form of tuning. That's not normal to me. I expect that generic profiles are generic. They're not fast, but they're reliable, and reliability matters to me a lot more than speed, which makes sense, considering the speedy printer that we have is not reliable. Now, in your case, you might have better luck, but me personally, 0% success rate still. And support, for some reason, is going on about me having support issues. This is the part, and in fact, I actually showed you guys the model that I sent to Bambu Lab support. We were trying to print these for a client. This is one of the failures that we had when the machine just outright stopped extruding. And support said that I should change my support settings. But on a part like this, it's not a support issue. In fact, the support is great. I've got no issues with the support. I've got continued issues with extrusion. And then when I say that, support tells me that that's not what I said and that I'm flip-flopping back and forth. Bambu, I don't know what you're doing to train your people, but I've offered like 4 or 5 times to help. I recommend you take me up on that offer, because telling customers that they're flip-flopping back and forth when they're not is a real problem. When I send this file and I say that I'm having constant extrusion issues with my AMS and without my AMS, and it's happening more with the AMS, so we know there's a drag issue with the AMS, but it is happening with all materials, all the extruders I have, all the hot ends that I have. It's happening on all of the things. And you tell me that it's a support issue. You're right, it is a support issue, but not on my side. I digress. Finally, we have a fail from the 3D printing Facebook group where they're wondering what's going on with this benchy. We've got some answers in the comments. Let's take a look. We got people talking about setting layer time to 10-second minimum and increasing fan. Probably need to set a minimum layer here, increase the cooling time. I'll see some under extrusion. I thought you added a sleeping cat on top for a second. Are you settings ironing the highest layer? Not enough time to cool, cooling. Every single one of you is wrong. Greg Pfeiffer here got it right. I want to say bed adhesion failed. This is failed bed adhesion. And you know how we know this? It's because the chimney should be right here, and it's not. So what happened is the benchy popped off the build plate, and as the chimney is printing, it started to get stuck. It got stuck to where it's printing more often, which happens to be here on the roof. We're not doing any type of ironing here. Trust me, this is not a clean enough part to be ironed. But the benchy looks okay, little stringing here, but this is what upsets me so much about groups. We have one person that's right, one person out of what, a dozen? Literally, someone says, no. Care to elaborate? Part cooling, layer doesn't have enough time to cool, adds the next layer, turns into a blob. No, because that would be over here on the chimney, not over here. That's not what it is. I promise you. Then Kevin goes on to say, then why wouldn't he ask why his print lifted and got stuck? Why are you two the minority for answers? It's okay to be wrong. Facebook is such a fucking toxic place. I truly don't understand it. This, to anybody that has been doing this long enough, knows this is a bed adhesion problem. Your part doesn't have to warp up to have bed adhesion issues. Your part can just pop off, especially if it's a glass plate. Now, we don't know much about Sean's particular printer, other than we can see it's got a textured build plate. I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say I think this is a Soval. I could be wrong, but this looks like the Soval build plate. But textured build plates have a notorious problem with not grabbing onto parts because we're used to looking for glass-like first layers. And when you're doing a textured build plate, you gotta be a little bit closer to the bed than you think. But this level of back and forth and just being not even nice, just being an asshole is not okay. And I get that everybody else disagrees, but I would pretty much guarantee that I've got more experience here. And you know what, guys? Let's let the comments decide. If you think that it is a cooling issue, put that in the comments and let me know. But if you agree with me that it is a bed issue where the part has popped off the bed and gotten stuck, and the user, Mr. Knight here, has gotten away without having a blob of doom, pretty lucky, put that down there too. Let me know what you think. While sure, setting a layer time to 10 seconds minimum and increase fan speed is not bad advice, it's not the right advice for this. And I don't see under extrusion on the roof like we see. I actually, if anything, see a bit of over extrusion, but it could also be the material playing tricks with the camera. We see this often where certain materials, especially shiny ones, can look way worse than they should. We look at the side of this and there's a little bit of damage on the side of the boat, but I don't think it's going to look that bad. I just think that material is not the best color for photography, but I would bet money on the fact that out of all the people here, Greg Pfeiffer is right. Let me know what you guys think in those comments below. That's all we have for you all today. Stay safe out there. Don't forget to call your loved ones. And as always, keep making awesome, where it's adding error rather than it being back and forth. Whoops. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. And a massive thank you goes out to all of our Patreon, PayPal, and YouTube channel member supporters whose names are listed right next to me at the $5 tier and higher. Thank you for all that you guys do in making these videos possible. And thank you to all the new Discord members. It's great to see more people joining that $10 tier to come hang out with us in the Discord. Right below me will be the entire PrintFix Friday series where you can see what we've done and where we gotten it right and, hey, where we get it wrong from time to time. And right next to that will be a completely random video that YouTube thinks you should click. I think you should click them both. Not before you leave a comment. That's where I will see you as well in the next one. Take care.